I give the call to the member for Pearce.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. In 2007, I recall it distinctly being rapt as a young 37-year-old watching the television when the then opposition leader Kevin Rudd ran a primetime advertisement throughout Western Australia prior to the 2007 election. And in that advertisement, he promised a $100 million fund for Western Australia, a $100 million infrastructure fund. And remember, not just a $100 million fund in total, a $100 million a year fund for Western Australia that was to be paid for out of a share of the petroleum revenue resource tax from Chevron's Gorgon project and Woodside's Pluto project. Of course, $100 million a year over 6 potential years, $600 million, that's a fairly significant promise. Well, sadly, as early as 1 September 2012, the Australian newspaper reported, and I'm quoting, Wayne Swan refused to say this week whether that promise would ever be honoured. And of that $100 million promise that was in prime time television, advertised to all of the members and residents of Western Australia, how much did we see of that promise?
None.
Not a red cent. Not a cent. And indeed, that ad ended, if I recall, with a statement that John Howard had been ripping off WA, and that the good electors in 2007 should vote for then Mr Kevin Rudd. And I think the question begs that if the Labor Party is the great friend of WA and is doing so much for infrastructure and putting so much money into WA, why is it that they hold 3 seats in WA and members on this side 12? Has the entire population of Western Australia been gripped by delusion? Do they not know the reality of the situation? And Mr Deputy Speaker, I know the member for Perth. I knew her from a different context, and whilst I would sometimes disagree with her conclusions, I largely found her to be an organised and intelligent member of Parliament. One thing, Mr Deputy Speaker, I didn't know was the extent of her political courage. Such extreme courage that it borders on a cavalier disregard for one's own political safety and rationality. To get out here with emotion, with a straight face, and argue somehow that in a direct comparison that the Federal Labor Party is the friend of the West Australian constituent and the West Australian taxpayer is a level of political courage bordering on the cavalier. And I just say to the member, no matter how short time appears, no matter how desperate things are, you don't always have to follow the orders of your leadership group. And indeed, you look, member, at the Falklands. There was a great rumour of an SAS raid which was to be set down on Tierra del Fuego. However, the SAS, even them, known for their great courage, refused to take that order, so the story goes, because they thought it was too much of a suicide mission. And remember, when I look rationally at what you are trying to do, just before a full Senate election, you are trying to put a motion that makes this point. However absurd the point is that contrary to all the best judgment exercised over successive elections by the West Australian people, that contrary to all the empirical data, that contrary to the well-known recent history after 6 years of Labor, that Labor is somehow the better friend to the West Australian people than the Coalition. And I find, member, that quite extraordinary. And I've noted that 2007 promise for $100 million a year, of which not a cent eventuated, which wasn't exactly the best start to Labor's promises. What did we then have? A $100 million fund over years, not a cent. Then the carbon tax. Then the mining tax. Then I recall, because I framed the budget in 2011, the West Australian government had the temerity to modestly remove a previous discount on fines iron ore to raise a fair amount of revenue for the people of West Australia. And do you recall what the response of the federal Labor government was? To threaten the West Australian people with diminished infrastructure funding because we'd had the temerity to raise a royalty rate. Do you remember that, member? I am assured that you do. Mr Ferguson said the federal government had promised to boost infrastructure spending by $200 million a year in WA over 10 years using the proceeds of the mining tax, and this would now have to be reduced. A direct and extraordinary threat. Of course, a hollow one, because the tax raised no money in any event. Member, you are like Reg in the darkened rooms of the Roman Empire. What has the Coalition ever done for us? Yes, they'll remove the mining tax. Of course, there's that. Yes, they will get rid of the carbon tax. Yes, there's that. Yes, the Gateway project, $686 million. Yes, the Swan Valley Bypass, $615 million. The Great Northern Highway, $307 million. The North West Coastal Highway, $174 million. Leach Highway, $59 million. Tonkin Highway, $140 million. Yes, yes, yes. But aside from that and the aqueducts, what has the Coalition ever done for us? If you are serious, member, and you are taking this back to our glorious home state, I hope you can do it with as straight a face as possible or as good a disguise as you can muster.
I thank the member for Perth.